Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, October 12th, 2022. Time for another show and time to investigate this thing that has popped up on my screen here. I gotta see if I can screen capture this thing. I don't know what this is supposed to be advertising, and I'm reluctant to click on anything, but I don't know. It's at the Daily Kos site, so maybe it generates some revenue if I click on it. You know, dumb ads all over the place on the internet, of course. This one, I assume, is designed to make me click on it, so that's why I'm reluctant to do it. I mean, they're all designed to make me click on it, but the reason is dumb. And anyway, you know, there's all sorts of things you'll see on the internet. The one weird trick that does that, the thing they don't want you to know, this person enraged somebody else with this thing and find out why. This time, it says, scatter charcoal in your home. Which is a mess. I mean, I don't think you should do it, and I don't know whether this is like supposed to be like an air purification kind of thing or what, but I mean, you don't like to just take charcoal briquettes and throw them all over your carpet or anything, but that's what it appears like they're doing. But not only that, so it says that's the headline, and then it says, scatter charcoal throughout your home and watch what happens overnight. Now, the photo here is of a pile of charcoal briquettes. I mean, not the, Kingsford grilling briquettes, but the natural stuff, naturally shaped, and one like red hot coal sitting on top of the other, presumably still cool black coals. And, well, I mean, I can tell you, if you scatter that charcoal throughout your home and then watch what happens overnight, the answer is your house burns down, I guess. But I don't know what's supposed to happen with the other charcoal, and, I feel like an idiot trying to find out. Like, do I want to know? I'm so curious. So we're all going to explore it together. And it does say over here on the side, no, maybe this is it. This says, there's another little ad in the corner here from, like, the ad council with the little Smokey Bear thing here. It says, don't keep it lit. Extinguish it. It's a good rhyme and a good idea. And I don't know if it's related or not. Here's what happened overnight when Grandma scattered charcoal throughout her home. This is where this stupid click leads you. And what happens? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Do I want to? I mean, I think they burned down the house. And is it supposed to be that? Okay, well, this is, of course, charcoal odor absorbing packets is what they're eventually getting around to advertising here. And that's what they really mean. Why it's paired with a don't keep it lit, extinguish it thing, I don't know. And I gather that's algorithmic too. You're not supposed to put lit charcoal around your house, especially not at night. I mean, you shouldn't do it at any time of day, obviously, I think. But if you're going to close your eyes on it, it's probably a bad idea. Anyway, so that's the dumb advertorial that I clicked through, and maybe it generated some revenue for Daily Kos, and if that's the case, then I'm happy about that, and we can just leave it there. Anyway, I would advocate not scattering charcoal around your home or anyone else's home, for that matter. Anyway, I'm at a loss because Greg's busy today. Nothing major. Be back tomorrow, but, life sometimes gets in the way, and you do other things. I don't know what these things are. I've never heard of them. Maybe you're doing some of them. I don't know. You can send me a note at the KITM hashtag. Tell me what sorts of things you do during the day besides listen to this show. That's crazy. I don't have any idea what you might be doing with your time, but you can let me know. Plenty to check in on, of course, today. Let's see. What was I retweeting earlier this morning? Once again, Republicans saying something crazy that makes me say, yes, every Republican accusation is a confession. Now I remember. And the word is in that they have gotten a guilty plea in the case that must have arisen, I guess about 2 years ago, because it looks like it's dated to the last general election, in which, and remember, we're in a rash of these things being reported again, which is why this is relevant. A rash of people reporting that, oh my God, they've been terrorized by the left, and isn't it time to crack down on all these people who are spray painting things on their driveway or on their cars that say stuff like Antifa rules or BLM is the best. Like really dumb and quite obvious planted fake vandalism. And it's just happened again, and Tudor Dixon, don't get in an elevator, like I said, with Tudor Dixon, is spreading these rumors in Michigan currently, and they're almost exactly identical to this one. This a story from where? I guess I'll have to click through to the story of Trump supporter pleads guilty to vandalizing own garage with Biden 2020 for profit. And how little he did, in fact, profit from it in the end. The man burned his own garage and several vehicles, getting $61,000 from insurance, don't they feel foolish, and $17,000 from GoFundMe. This reported in Gizmodo by Matt Novak, who shows a picture of the damage in progress. There's even little licks of flames in the corner of this garage. And yeah, on one garage door is spray painted Biden 2020, the favorite of all graffiti artists, taggers, and vandals, and BLM on the other door, and also what I guess they thought might be an anarchy symbol, but is in fact an A neatly enclosed inside of a circle, which was a bit of a giveaway on that. Anyway, that story reads, a Minnesota man has pleaded guilty to wire fraud after he set up a hoax in which he claimed people had spray-painted left-wing messages on his garage, including Biden 2020. It's an ultra-left message, isn't it? And an anarchy symbol, which it isn't, and BLM, which, by the way, stands for Bureau of Land Management. Very, very radical. I know, but they should always make that claim. Why isn't that the first thing that comes to mind? All right. Anyway, and of course he set fire to several vehicles, which is what you do with vehicles these days. According to a press release from the U.S. Department of Justice, you've heard of them. They're attempting to get ready anyway to prosecute Donald Trump at some point. All right, maybe you've heard about that. Anyway, it's not illegal to spray paint your own property, so I guess they don't have them there. But the man received about $61,000 from his insurance company and raised $17,000 on GoFundMe, which is a big no-no. I assume making false police reports about spray painting going on your property is also against the law, but I guess that's small potatoes compared to what he did. By the way, love to know what insurance company fell for that one. I mean, I can't, by the way, like did I say by the way about 15 times about this story? But I'm thinking, well, for one thing, I wonder if they do health insurance, because I'd like to get some of that health insurance, because we pay for health insurance, and, they lay out the terms of what you're able to get reimbursed for. And then we go and have those things, immunizations, doctor visits. And the first reaction of the insurance company is, oh, we don't pay for that. And you're supposed to go through the song and dance of calling them and saying, but you're supposed to, and I demand that you do it. Oh, please hold, and I'll put you on the line of people who, are insisting on getting paid on the things that we're supposed to pay for. And if you wait 20 minutes, I'll come back and tell you can have it. And if you give up and leave, then we'll keep the money. And then you wait a while, and then they come back and they say, oh, yeah, we're an insurance company. That's right. We are supposed to pay for that. I forgot about that. Meanwhile, this guy gets $61,000 for spray painting his own garage and setting his cars on fire. Did he even have to wait online and listen to online, or hold music for 20 minutes or anything? Or did they just jump in and give him money? This is very backwards in the insurance world. Anyway, it all started, the story tells us, on September 23rd, 2020. Now, I thought things started before then, just generally, but everything apparently started on September 23rd, 2020, which is good for us because we're only a couple of years old now, When 30-year-old Dennis Malla, that's the bad guy in this, and he's so bad that he spells his first name, Dennis, with one N, and his last name, Malla, with two L's. So, this guy doesn't even distribute his consonants correctly. But Dennis Malla, 30 years old then, I guess, made a false report to police that his home had been vandalized. It wasn't even his home, I bet. How about that? We should look into that. Malla told police he saw 3 unknown men outside his home and heard an explosion. Malla told the police that he came outside to find BLM and other messages spray painted on his garage door, and his camper had been set on fire, apparently because he had a Trump 2020 flag affixed to it. Now, if you're going to light anything on fire, light the Trump 2020 flag, but they burned the camper because they hate campers. That's the thing about anarchists and Black Lives Matter activists. They hate campers. I mean, I think that's well known. Look, they even use some language that will have fun with our censoring horn. The bull story was picked up by outlets like Fox News, where host Laura Ingraham spoke with far-right influencer Shapiro about the incident. I love my censoring horn. And this is the interesting thing too. I've seen people reminding everybody by circulating this clip and just reminding everybody how much play Laura Ingraham, anyway, tried to give this thing, and Fox trying to trump this up. Like, look what's happening all across the country. And they got people convinced. They all believe, as murdery Trader Green now tours the country telling them that the killings have already begun. They, I guess, point to things like this and say people are being singled out for violence and vandalism and all sorts of who knows what, targeting because they're Trump supporters, and then it turns out that, of course, they were doing it to themselves. Here's the quote from Laura Ingraham, and it might be worth it to you to listen to the voices saying these things. I could play the clip, but anyway, there's a message being sent, Ben, by the far left. And I think people are beginning to see that arsonist behavior, looting, even murder. None of it's off the table, Ingraham said in a rather hilarious, in their view, escalation during the Fox News segment. The story was covered extensively by local news as well, with Dennis Malla's wife, Deanna Malla, one N in Deanna, by the way, appearing at his side during interviews. She wasn't going to sit on top of him during the interview. What are you thinking? All right. Anyway, asking why someone would target them for their political beliefs. Now, of course, the answer is they would target you for your political beliefs because you're a criminal, and your political beliefs are criminal in themselves. Like, you thought it would be politically feasible to do something like this, and that presumably the world would be a better place if people thought that unknown leftists were assaulting you for your belief in Trump, even though, I don't know, I'm not certain what people were supposed to think about it, but at any rate, there you go. You thought that was a legitimate political thing to do, and people do hate you for those political beliefs. They're terrible political beliefs. You should be ashamed of yourselves. I hate you for having those political beliefs. I'm not ashamed to say that. I hate the idea that somebody thought that, one, hey, I can make a little money, too, and defraud some insurance companies, and I have to do this in order to stop all the waste, fraud, and abuse that Democrats are doing to our national budget, or whatever the hell they convince themselves. And also those dangerous thugs who do all those illegal things. I'm going to show you that those sorts of things are in fact going on. They are burning America's cities to the ground. I don't live in a huge city, but I'll burn what I have to the ground to prove to you that things are burning to the ground. Whether or not they're actually doing it, well, that's between me and my insurance company and the Lord. There's no word what God has to say about this. We'll have to wait and see. I assume that judgment comes at some later date in this guy's calendar. I don't know. At any rate, that's just kind of, it's rather damning. I'll say that and just put that on the table. Maybe somebody will burn after all of this is over at some stage, but, who knows? Maybe they repent and become, I don't know what. Anyway, let's see. So they go on and they're asking, why would someone target us for our political beliefs? These people knew that we had children. They did because they were you, of course. Deanna Molla told KARE 11, the local television station, as footage played of the fire-damaged playground equipment in their yard, and they still thought it was okay to do this. Boo-hoo, sob story. I mean, think about that line. I don't know, maybe Deanna didn't know that Dennis had set the fire, but it's pretty remarkable. And I would like to find out whether or not, they have children per se, because I can't tell you how many people still have playground equipment in their yard 20 years after the kids have moved out. So, no word on that. They still thought it was okay to do this. You still thought it was okay to stay married to the people who did this, but, maybe you didn't know. Deanna Molla was not named in the initial indictment, if that helps, and it's not clear what she knew about her husband's scheme, but she has some idea now, presumably. It all could have ended right there with a nationally recognized news story about left-wing craziness and the intolerance of political differences. But apparently Dennis Molla had a different motive for the hoax, or at least one other. Molla submitted an insurance claims for his garage, camper, trucks, and his house, totaling roughly $300,000. Now that sounds more likely in terms of the insurance story. Like at first I thought he just said, hey, stuff burned, give me $61,000, and they did it. But now it makes more sense. He said, stuff burned, I need $300,000. That's how much damage I had. And he got $61,000. That sounds like the insurance companies I know. All right, that makes a little bit more sense. Finally, something's making sense in this story. Amazingly, Molla had the audacity to question his insurance company's denial of some of those claims despite their fraudulent nature. When Molla's insurance company denied some of those claims, Molla submitted a written complaint to the insurance company, claiming that it was defrauding him and threatened to report the company to the Department of Commerce and to the Attorney General, the DOJ said in a statement, which is what you would do if you thought you were being genuinely, defrauded by your insurance company. But that's, there's really no other play for him to make. He can't go on TV and say that vandals did this to him and then accept $61,000 in lieu of the $300,000 worth of damage that he says he suffered, although he may have been lying about that as well. Who knows? But you can't just say, I'll take it if you are trying to pretend you're really a victim here. So he painted himself into a corner and got in even more trouble. Molla also pocketed $17,135.94 from a GoFundMe campaign called Patriots for the Mollas, not the Mullahs. That's something too. There's your Matrix glitch for the day, the Mullahs. Patriots for the Mullahs, where he documented his property losses and thanked the numerous donors in the comments, according to the indictment filed by the Department of Justice. Molla also reiterated his threats to the insurance company in those GoFundMe comments, according to DOJ. Is there any link to his GoFundMe page? No, I don't think so. They don't make it easy, but it would be interesting to go and see and look it up. I don't know if it's still up, but it would be interesting to get the names of the donors and then do interviews with them and say, how do you feel about that? And are you doing anything to get your money back? Seems interesting. And, why does it keep happening in the country? And have you ever donated to anybody else, in a situation like this? Were they his neighbors? Was it just somebody who were donors who saw the story on TV? Are any of them repeat donors to different people who claim to have been victims of left-wing vandalism or something like that? I'd be very curious to know about that. And are they also Trump donors? And don't you feel defrauded by everybody at this point? I don't know. I'd like to get inside their head briefly, and then please let me back out. Let's see. All right, so he complains. He pocketed the money from GoFundMe. Does it say that they tried to get the money out of their hands and give it back to people at any point? I don't know. There were plenty of people who found the whole thing suspicious from the outset, like normal America, For starters, anyone spray painting an anarchy symbol is unlikely to be a supporter of Biden, one of the most centrist Democrats around, and even people affiliated with BLM, which, by the way, stands for Black Lives Matter, aren't the biggest Biden fans around. I mean, they're not the biggest fans necessarily in the world, although they certainly produced votes as a black community, but yeah, okay, fine. The two don't typically go together as graffiti messages anyway. That's certainly true, except in fake circumstances like this. But there were other things that skeptics picked up on, such as the claim early on that, quote, one of the family's surveillance cameras was blocked just before the explosion, according to a story by WCCO in Minnesota. Mala's story was also a little too perfect as a ploy for sympathy. As that same story from CBS said, the family was also able to save 4 puppies from the smoke-filled garage. Puppies saved from a burning garage. Why not say you saved Grandma an apple pie as well, Mr. True-Blooded American? That seems like an editorial comment there, sir. Does that belong in your, well, it's okay in Gizmodo, I guess. Mala faces up to 20 years in prison, wow, and a maximum fine of $250,000, just raise it by GoFundMe, and will be sentenced at a later date. You can click through the slideshow, if you want to, for more photos of the hoax that were shown on various newscasts around the country. Seems like a fun thing to do if you want to see the slideshow. Anyway, as I said, I think it was Tudor Dixon most recently circulating similar rumors, and everybody thought the same thing when somebody claimed to have been vandalizing again their cars and was spray painted. And that happened a couple of days ago. I'll take a look around for it and see if I can dig it up and put it side by side with this one. But you obviously remember that this sort of story has happened before. And let's see, Nancy Mace was upset saying somebody spray painted / chalked something on her sidewalk. Similarly, it comes up every so often. And occasionally it's the police that are doing it. Oh, they were throwing, what did they say? Cement milkshakes at us at one point. Somebody wasn't there a cop saying, somebody put a tampon in my Frappuccino. That's an actual sentence that got uttered in the news by a police officer at some point in a play for sympathy. And none of this ever turns out to be true. And I guess I'm glad that they keep doing this to themselves. Maybe more people will catch on as time goes on that this is nonsense. But in the meantime, you got to deal with credulous local news people saying, that this is a widening crisis for our country, like rainbow fentanyl and furries, all of which are totally happening. Anyway, there are other stories that I could share with you, but screw it. That's really all I want to talk about all day long. There's much more, of course, and with Greg out, I feel a little bit directionless, and I thought I would head over and look at the pundit roundup, but then I thought, he probably wants to save a lot of that for Thursday too. So we may lean on that at some point. And it's always good to get a second look at those stories with Greg's perspective added to things. It's not like I'm going to ruin the story or anything. But anyway, break coming up, but not quite yet. How about we read a little bit of commentary from Dana Milbank, who I like to avoid reading commentary from. But, you know about that guy, right? Anyway, he has a piece under an irresistible headline in the Washington Post. Think you already know crazy? Meet the House GOP, class of 22. Although, hopefully they won't actually matriculate. Can we have order in the House? He begins, not if this crowd takes over. Get it? See what he's doing here? Much of the public focus in the midterm elections has been on the exotic nature of the Republican nominees in Senate and gubernatorial races, and understandably so. There's Mehmet Oz's crudité, right? I remember that one. Doug Mastriano's white supremacists, which you, by the way, can also dip into delicious ranch dressing if you like. And Herschel Walker's, well, pretty much everything he says and does. But GOP nominees for the House are no less erratic, just less well known. I think they're even worse, actually, in many cases. There's the woman from North Carolina who was accused of hitting one husband with an alarm clock, and it wasn't even her husband. It's crazy. Trying to hit another with a car, and also menacing him with a frying pan. Does this mean I guess she's been married a couple of times and is abusive to all of them? Oh, and also punching her daughter, just for added kicks, punches, whatever. She denies that, I think maybe all of it, though she also invoked a conspiracy belief that alien lizards control the government. So I think that's pretty fair. These are all linked, and I don't know, does he bother telling us who these people are? Sandy Smith, I guess, is the wacko's name. There's the man from Ohio who lied about his military record. We talked about that one. Lavishly promoted QAnon themes, acknowledged bypassing police barriers at the Capitol on January 6th, and with 120 gallons of paint, turned his entire lawn into a Trump banner. Though he said BLM did it, and he meant Bureau of Land Management, which was weird. Anyway, there's one more, I guess, before our music begins. There's a man from Michigan who claimed that Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman participated in a satanic ritual. They all claim that, of course. And who once disparaged women's suffrage, and who, though black, raised concern about Democrats eroding the white population. There's even more, and one more I guess we can sneak in over the music. Then there are the Texas woman accused by her estranged husband of cruelty toward his teenage daughter, the Colorado woman who backed an effort to secede from her state, the Virginia woman who speculated that rape victims wouldn't get pregnant, and the Wisconsin man who used campaign funds from his failed 2020 race to come to Washington on January 6th, where he apparently breached Capitol barricades. They all did this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We were discussing how crazy Republicans are, and how, in particular, how crazy the Class O22, the Republican candidates for Congress, are. Besides the top of the ticket folks in running for Senate and governor, plenty of crazy House candidates as well. And the scary note is, of course, that a lot of them have made it through their primaries, are running in places where Republicans either are, in some cases, a lock or have a pretty good shot at winning any particular race on any given Tuesday, as we say. But, hopefully some of them will be very quickly relegated to the ash heap of history, more ashes, as thematic for the show. Sprinkle lit charcoal, and Biden 2020 signs around your house and see what happens, I guess, to bring everything back together. We left off with yet another of the candidates who was on hand to breach the Capitol barricades on January 6th. What they all have in common, Dana Milbank has to say, or whispers to you. What they all have in common is that they're in competitive races, which means they could well be a part of the Republican House majority, if they have one, in January. And he doesn't even bother to temper that with saying, if they actually win one. But whatever. Anyway, that's on top of a larger group of GOP nominees in deep red congressional districts who are a motley assortment of election deniers, climate change deniers, QAnon enthusiasts, and January 6th participants who propose to abolish the FBI and ban abortion with no exceptions, among other things. Some won nominations despite efforts by party leadership to stop them and continue without financial support from the National Republican Congressional Committee, which, by the way, if they actually win, then I guess that changes, and you'll find the National Republican Congressional Committee supporting their bid for re-election in 2024. Maybe this is why Kevin McCarthy, the man who, as House Speaker, would have the task of leading this rogues gallery, and by the way, he would also have the task of leading that rogues gallery if he were a minority leader, but apparently that's not worth saying, calls his agenda a commitment to America. Many members of his new majority might be good candidates for commitment. We were getting around to a joke with all of that. J.R. Majewski, the Trump-backed lawn painter from Ohio, has a different agenda. He wants to, quote, abolish all unconstitutional three-letter agencies, including the CIA, and if it has more than that, like if it's, well, let's see. Oh, yeah, right, there's the, what is it, CFBP, I can't even remember, or PB, I can't remember whether the initials run that way, but this is only if you're three letters, apparently. Anything beyond that, you get to stay. The more letters you have, and if one of them is an A and a circle spray painted on your garage, yeah, so much the better. So he wants to abolish all the three-letter agencies, including the CIA. He's said he's willing to fight a civil war and has made a campaign video in which he carried a rifle and said he would quote, do whatever it takes to, quote, bring this country back to its former glory. You know, why he threatens self-harm in this video, I'm not entirely sure, but that would partly bring the country back a little closer to its former glory, I suppose. If J.R. Majewski wasn't around, I mean, you know, he wasn't around in 1776, why should he be walking around now, I guess? Sure, that's one way of looking at it. And he's got a red fleece vest, so you should be listening to him, don't you think? Here's Sandy Smith, aforementioned, although she wasn't actually mentioned, but we had to look at the link to figure out who it was. Sandy Smith, pictured here, the Republican running in North Carolina's 1st congressional district. In North Carolina, Sandy Smith is folding into her plans for the country the domestic abuse allegations against her. Okay. That's good. She's going to not abuse the whole country the same way, I guess. That's a nice plan. I never ran over anyone with a car, and I never hit anyone in the head with a frying pan. But I'm hoping to at some point, and with federal authority. I don't know where she's going with this, but this is the rough equivalent of I am not a witch, but okay. I am bringing a frying pan to D.C., though, she says. She tweeted in May. Disclosure. Dana Milbank says, my wife, a pollster, is a consultant to Smith's Democratic opponent. And what is left unstated here is that Smith's Democratic opponent is going to bring an Instant Pot to D.C. and maybe, who knows, hit someone over the head with that, I guess. I don't know. I made that up. It's a big lie. Smith also wants, quote, executions of those who, she falsely claims, stole the 2020 election from Donald Trump. All right, next up, maybe this is what John Gibbs, the Michigan Republican who questioned women's suffrage, had in mind when he wrote as a Stanford student. That's the most amazing part about this stuff. So a lot of these people actually went to, you know, some of them are just lifelong dopes and never went anywhere, but others of them are allegedly smart people who were granted the opportunity through whatever circumstances to study at our elite universities. At any rate, you know, some may be legacy students, some may be just brilliant kids who tested beautifully and wrote wonderful essays. But apparently some of the essays were about how women shouldn't vote, I guess. Anyway, so John Gibbs did this at Stanford, writing that women don't, quote, possess, which he misspelled, but, things can happen even at Stanford, possess the characteristics necessary to govern, unquote, because they rely on, quote, emotional reasoning, which is, of course, a terrible crime. McCarthy will surely have to put down many an uprising from what might be termed the Insurrection Caucus. Wisconsin nominee Derek Van Orden, like Majewski and a few other GOP nominees, was outside the Capitol that day and was photographed inside a restricted area, though he says he left when things turned violent because he's chicken. Grr, I don't know. And Kelly Cooper, a nominee in Arizona, wants, quote, the prisoners of January 6th to be released on day one of their prison sentence. They should be released into a pit of alligators, I think. We'll compromise. Bipartisan compromise. The two of us can work together as a gang. Next up, George Santos, a nominee in New York who claimed he was the victim of election fraud in his failed 2020 bid. Sam Peters, a nominee in Nevada who has used the hashtag QArmy and embraced being called the male Marjorie Taylor Greene, which, whatever. That's funny. So I guess you've really made it when the people of the opposite what used to be considered the one and only opposite gender, but now just one of many, I guess. But they would tell you there's only two and they're from the opposite. But it's interesting that it works the other way. It's very often it's the women saying, I'm the female, I'm the female Donald Trump. And now here's a male Marjorie Taylor Greene. Anyway, what's his name? Sam Peters claims that banner. And he's probably not the only one either. And let's see, he characterized those facing charges for the insurrection as civically engaged American citizens exercising their constitutional freedoms. All right, well, sometimes you lose your constitutional freedoms if you exercise them too hard, and that's the way it goes. It's like a torn hamstring. Anyway, and Iowa nominee Zach Nunn, with two N's at the end. That makes three of the letters of his last name, Nunn, and the other one is a U. So that's like Ted Budd, just too many of the same letters for my taste. Anyway, Zach Nunn found it suspicious that Capitol Police couldn't, quote, stop a bunch of middle-aged individuals from walking onto the floor, and argued that not a single one of the defendants was charged with and convicted of insurrection. And that, of course, is because, as Dana notes, the charge is actually seditious conspiracy, but other than that, never mind. Madison Gesiotto. Oh, I'm sorry, that's just the middle name. Madison Gesiotto Gilbert, a nominee from Ohio, was precocious in her false claims of election fraud. She claimed in 2018 that a voting machine had switched her vote in the Ohio Senate race from Republican to Democrat. Okay. Let's see. Is that, no, that's, there's another lunatic out there that I'm thinking of. It's somebody else. But was that the woman that showed up in it was in Michigan, right? There was a woman, a blonde woman who sounded awfully, intoxicated at a hearing at some point with Rudy Giuliani. Isn't she run? Did she make it? Did she not win her primary? Maybe that's what happened to her. Anyway, overlapping with the Insurrection Caucus are those with qualifications that might at best be called unconventional. Monica de la Cruz, a Texas nominee and top GOP recruit, was accused in a court filing a year ago of cruel and aggressive conduct toward her then husband's 14-year-old daughter, including pinching the teen to stop her from crying, which seems like the opposite solution. She denies the claim. She was, in fact, trying to make her cry, I guess. In Colorado, nominee Barbara Kirkmeyer once led an attempt by 11 counties there to secede and become their own state. I wonder what they would have called that one. They probably had a whole thing anyway, and maybe it's here at the link. Led an attempt. Want to find out? Maybe later. In North Carolina, back in North Carolina again, nominee Bo Hines, who wants a 10-year moratorium on immigration, by the way, spoke of a banana republic as though the common term for flailing democracies was actually referring to the clothing store of the same name. Okay, So, well, we need to get back to our J. Crew roots, I guess. Does that make me old? What's Vineyard Vines? Maybe the kids would know. Anyway, of course, the People's House has always attracted the eccentric and even the shady from both parties. But the would-be Republican class of 22 is extraordinary in the number of oddballs and extremists in its ranks. I think that's true. This is no accident. The trend in Republican primaries, accelerated by Trump, has favored those with the most eye-popping tapestry of conspiracy theories and unyielding positions. GOP primaries are dominated by a sliver of the electorate on the far right. That's why they produce figures such as Eric Adland, A-A-D-L-A-N-D. That's too many A's, although we complain less about the vowels than the consonants. But now it can be equal opportunity. And it is binary. There are things that are only vowels and only consonants. And there the twain shall meet. And don't try to, oh, well, there's Y. But okay. And in olden days, H. True, but, anyway, you know, something, something, something. A-E-I-O-U. The sometimes Y is really just a complainer and is faking it, and I think is just confused, and surely with recuperative therapy can be convinced it's a consonant, I think. Anyway, let's see. Where were we? Oh, yes. Eric Adland, the Colorado nominee who claims that the 2020 election was, quote, absolutely rigged, and that the country is, quote, let me guess. Oh, it's not even Civil War. I was going to guess with Civil War. On the brink, I saw that, of being taken over by a communist government. Presumably through Civil War, though. So, you know, I think I'm still right there. And who has followed various extremist groups, including the Proud Boys, on social media. So, okay. I mean, I don't know how you don't want to be associated with the Proud Boys, but it looks like if he followed them on Facebook, I don't know how associated he really is. It's not good, but anyway. What's interesting is that he also was a big fan on Facebook of the Fat Boys, the rap artists of the 1980s, and that doesn't tell us anything. And it's also made up. But other than that, even if it wasn't, what would we learn from this? In New Jersey, Frank Palata is again a Republican nominee after declaring during his 2020 run for the same seat that he stands by the Oath Keepers, a group whose leaders are now on trial over January 6th. Starting in January, a likely narrow Republican majority might have to find consensus among a freshman class that can't agree on basic facts. Like whether or not they have a majority, really. I mean, I don't think we should jump the gun there, but I see what he's doing. It's Dana Milbank. He's going to do these things. Caroline Leavitt, spelled with a K, by the way, not Leavitt. That has no K's in it at all. A nominee in New Hampshire claims that, quote, the alleged existential threat of climate change is a manufactured crisis by the Democrat Party, which is syntactically nightmarish. And I see what you mean. A manufactured crisis, really should be a crisis manufactured by the Democrat Party. It would still be syntactically nightmarish, but at least it would be correct. In the syntax structure would be all right, but the Democrat Party thing's still a problem. In Virginia, remember this one? Nominee Yesli Vega argued that it was less likely, I think she said impossible, for rape victims to become pregnant because, quote, it's not something that's happening organically, which I guess is the new lingo for it shuts that whole thing down. Now, she has ordinarily, you would think, like you would make assumptions about gender. Are you ready for this one? One, she appears to be a woman. And two, she doesn't know how this stuff works. And three, by the way, she was a cop. So who knows how long she was running around taking evidence, possibly of rape cases, finding out that the victim was pregnant and then writing down in her notes that this probably couldn't be a rape after all because the victim was pregnant. I don't know whether that ever happened. But let's not find out and ever let her be a cop again either. But let's prevent that by routing her in her congressional race and then retiring her from public life altogether, if that's possible. All right, let's see. Other things in the story. Also in Virginia, nominee in my own district, Hung Kao, which I don't have anything to say about that name. Hung Kao. Okay. Well, it's, what is he? Vietnamese? Vietnamese American. At any rate, he at one point had his biography presented to me. As I said, he's the Republican nominee in this district here. What is he up to? He asserted that more, quote, people got bludgeoned to death and stabbed to death than they get shot, which also syntactical nightmare, but is also wrong by an order of magnitude. But these nominees have offered unique policy ideas. Robert Burns of New Hampshire said in 2018 that he would allow abortion only to protect, quote, the life of the mother, but, quote, we would need a panel in this sort of situation to decide whether the ailing woman can get the life-saving procedure. So, life and death panels, in other words. A real-life death panel, yes, he notes that as well. Challenged recently on this position, Burns replied last month, in response to the death panels, I believe women of color and low economic status deserve second and third opinions before being forced into abortions. Put another way, a woman would need a second and third opinion before she's allowed to save her own life, but maybe only if she's, of color or poor, I guess. The House Republican class of 22 will be many things, but boring is not one of them. Well, that's good news. I don't know how much, I guess they consider the congressional race here, or at least Dana Milbank considers it to be competitive. I don't know what the polling shows. Jennifer Wexton, in her first term, that's always vulnerable, but I don't know. I don't know how close that race is, but you always got to watch, and you can't be complacent, certainly, and you don't want anybody sneaking in on complacency, on any reason, for any reason, sneaking in, but certainly not that one, because that's so easily preventable. All right, well, we don't think that much better of Dana Milbank than we think of these people, but whatever. Occasionally he comes up with something, even if it's riddled with problematic passages, worth reading. Let's see, other things worth reading, and here we'll have to read the pocket version as we have run into our paywall here at the Atlantic. This sounded somewhat interesting. By the guy who once, Franklin Foer is, I think everybody probably knows the name off the top of their head, and I have seen it 100 times, and I'm trying to remember which guy is that? Is he, I don't know. At any rate, he's got a piece about, his latest thing here is the inevitable indictment of Donald Trump. And, that sounds pretty good. But Franklin Foer's name comes up all the time. And, like I said, I can't really remember exactly which one he is and what he's responsible for and what he's not. So I think I'll skip all of that unless I can tell very quickly by scanning Wikipedia. And I can't. So at any rate, his name, as I said, comes up fairly frequently. He's quoted all over the place. And I'd like to see what this is all about. The inevitable indictment of Donald Trump. And you may be right. It just won't happen before the election. Merrick Garland hasn't tipped his hand, but it's clear to me, Franklin Foer, that he will bring charges against the former president. And I think the argument here is, logically it's inescapable, but whether or not he actually does it or does it at a time that makes a difference, it remains to be seen. As an appellate judge, it begins, Merrick Garland was known for constructing narrow decisions that achieved consensus without creating extraneous controversy. As a government attorney, he was known for his zealous adherence to the letter of the law. As a person, he is a smaller-than-life figure, a dry conversationalist, studious listener, something close to the opposite of a raconteur. As a driver, interestingly, his friends say he is maddeningly slow and almost comically fastidious. And as the nation's chief law enforcement officer, he is a hyper-prudential institutionalist who would like nothing more than to restore, quietly and deliberately, the Justice Department's reputation for probity, process, and apolitical dispassion, which is why it's so difficult for me to imagine him delighting in the choice he now faces, whether to become the first Attorney General in American history to indict a former president. But this is what I believe he is preparing himself to do. I have been observing Garland closely for months. I've talked with his closest friends and most loyal former clerks and deputies. I've carefully studied his record. I've interviewed Garland himself. And I've reached the conclusion that his devotion to procedure, his belief in the rule of law, and in particular his reverence for the duties, responsibilities, and traditions of the U.S. Department of Justice will cause him to make the most monumental decision an attorney general can make. And, Mom, if you're listening, if you're waiting with bated breath for whether or not I was going to make any mention of some of his most loyal former clerks, the answer is no. I'm preserving confidentiality here. Anyway, let me be absolutely clear. Garland did not tell me he was going to indict Donald Trump. In fact, he did not tip his hand to me in any way. He is far too cautious to signal his intentions to even his closest friends, much less a reporter, nor did his top aides suggest the announcement of an indictment. When his department says that it doesn't discuss ongoing cases, it means it, at least in this case. Which means that, look, they either mean it or they don't, but okay. Anyway, I guess more so in this case than in any other. Before I lay out the reasons I believe I am correct in this assessment, and why not wait until the end for that, I want to discuss why it is entirely possible I am not. It's very Garland in the writing as well. But okay, the main reason to disbelieve the argument that Garland is preparing to indict is simple. To bring criminal charges against a former president from an opposing political party would be the ultimate test of a system that aspires to impartiality, and Garland, by disposition, is repelled by drama and doesn't believe the department should be subjected to unnecessary stress tests. This unprecedented act would inevitably be used to justify a cycle of reprisals and risks turning the Justice Department into an instrument of never-ending political warfare. And an indictment, of course, would merely be the first step, a prelude to a trial unlike any this country has ever seen. You can almost hear Donald Trump saying it. The defendant wouldn't just be an ex-president. In all likelihood, he'd be the candidate actively campaigning to return to the White House. Fairness dictates that the system regard Trump as it does every other defendant, but doing so would lead to the impression that he's being deliberately hamstrung and humiliated by his political rivals. Garland is surely aware that this essential problem would be evident at the first hearing. If the Justice Department is intent on proving that nobody is above the law, it could impose the same constraints on Trump that it would on any criminal defendant accused of serious crimes, including limiting his travel. Such a restriction would deprive Trump of one of his most important political advantages, his ability to whip up his followers at far-flung rallies. In any event, once the trial began, Trump would be stuck in court, likely in Florida, if he is charged in connection with the Mar-a-Lago documents matter, or in Washington, D.C., if he is charged for his involvement in the events of January 6th. The site of a Washington trial would be the Prettyman Courthouse on Constitution Avenue, just a short walk from the Capitol. This fact terrified the former prosecutors and other experts I talked with about how the trial might play out. Right-wing politicians, including Trump himself, have intimated violence if he is indicted. Trump would, of course, attempt to make the proceedings a carnival of grievance, a venue for broadcasting conspiracy theories about his enemies. The trial could thus supply a climactic flashpoint for an era of political violence. Like the Capitol on January 6th, the courthouse could become a magnet for paramilitaries. With protesters and counter-protesters descending on the same locale, the occasion would tempt street warfare. The prospect of such a spectacle fills Merrick Garland with dread, his friends say. Indeed, for much of his tenure, he's been attacked by critics who claim he lacks the fortitude to meet the moment or to take on an adversary like Trump. Members of the House committee charged with examining the events of January 6th have publicly taunted Garland for moving tentatively when compared with their own aggressive and impeccably stage-managed hearings. Representative Adam Schiff has complained, "I think there's a real desire on the part of the Attorney General, for the most part, not to look backward." Privately, even President Joe Biden has grumbled about the plodding pace of Garland's investigations. But I believe if the evidence of wrongdoing is as convincing as it seems, he is going to indict Trump anyway. Over the course of my reporting, I came to appreciate that the qualities that strike Garland's critics as liabilities would make him uniquely suited to overseeing Trump's prosecution. Wouldn't that be great? The fact that he is strangely out of step with the times, that he is one of the few Americans in public life who don't channel or perform political anger, equips him to craft the strongest, most fair-minded case, a case that a neutral observer would regard as legitimate. I don't know how many neutral observers there are left, or whether any of the neutral observers know his reputation for, a deliberate and plodding fairness. But one would hope so, but I doubt it very much, and I think that they'll just be struck. The first impression they'll really get of him is this prosecution. So I worry about that too. United States versus Donald Trump would be about more than punishing crimes, whether inciting an insurrection, scheming to undermine an election, or absconding with classified documents. An indictment would be a signal to Trump as well as to would-be imitators that no one is above the law. Wouldn't that be a nice signal to send? This is the principle that has animated Garland's career, which began at the Justice Department, or as the Justice Department was attempting to reassert its independence and legitimacy after the ugly meddling of the Nixon years. If Garland has at times seemed daunted by the historic nature of the moment, that is at least in part because he appreciates how closely his next move will be studied and the role it will play in heading off, or not, the next catastrophe. We'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. And I guess back to the promised next catastrophe, the next segment of the show. I have also come to see, Franklin Foer continues in his piece about the inevitability of Trump's, in his view, the inevitability of his indictment. I have also come to see that the Garland of 2022 is not the same man who was sworn into office as Attorney General in March of the previous year at the age of 69. Everyone knows it's a nice age. His temperament is firmly fixed, but a year and a half on the job has transformed him. It was just a few months ago that I saw a different version of the Attorney General begin to emerge. While his investigation of January 6th continued at its slow pace, his sparring with Trump over the documents at Mar-a-Lago escalated quickly. Not really, but I mean, for him, I guess it was pretty quickly. And it is pretty illustrative. The escalation, I think, really tells us a lot about what's going on, and they really literally made every effort to do everything short of sending the FBI to seize the documents. And then when they finally did send the FBI to seize the documents, they did so in the lowest key way possible. Not that Trump didn't, in fact, lowercase t, trump up the accusations about how they did it. But at any rate, yes, all right. So while his investigation continued at a slow pace over January 6th, the sparring over the documents escalated quickly. The former president is no longer a figure on television, but his adversary in court. Garland approached him with an aggression that suggested he was prepared to do the very thing that critics said he didn't have the guts to do. The Merrick Garland who took over the Justice Department may have hoped he could restore its reputation without confronting Trump or dragging him into a courtroom, but the nation has changed in the intervening months, and so has he. Before he became Attorney General, Merrick Garland's life was defined by a job he has never held. Twice, Barack Obama considered lifting him from the D.C. Circuit onto the Supreme Court, and twice Obama passed him over. After those failed attempts to move beyond the short list, Garland seemed to age out of the possibility, past the point where the actuarial tables suggest that an appointment is a worthwhile investment. Then, in 2016, Antonin Scalia died, making him no longer a worthwhile investment, I guess, for Republicans. Garland got his nomination after all, only to see it scuttled in the Senate by the obstructionist tactics of Mitch McConnell. When Garland returned to the Court of Appeals after his nomination was blocked, he was greeted with an ovation from his colleagues. No doubt it was heartwarming, but the truth was that he was returning to an old routine after having been taunted with the job of his dreams. It would have only been human for his mind to ponder a fresh start. In the fall of 2020, with polls showing Joe Biden primed to defeat Donald Trump, friends began asking, would you ever want to be Attorney General? When Garland's name showed up on the list of Biden's potential AGs, it was fair to assume that he hoped the job would nudge the Supreme Court debacle out of the first paragraph of his obituary, but Garland told friends that he wanted to return to the Justice Department, where he'd worked as a young lawyer, and first found his sense of professional purpose, to restore an institution that he revered. It had been damaged by a succession of Trump appointees who carried out the policy of separating migrant children from their parents, distorted the findings of Robert Mueller's investigation, and allegedly brought cases in order to settle the president's political scores. As Garland prepared to take the job, he often sounded nostalgic for his first stint at the DOJ in the final years of the Carter administration, when he worked as a special assistant to Attorney General Benjamin Civiletti. Nobody thinks of the late 70s as the height of idealism, but that's how Garland remembers the time. In the aftermath of Watergate, he sat by Civiletti's side as he continued the work of reforming the Justice Department, writing new rules and procedures to prevent another president from ever abusing the institution. How'd that go, by the way? Just wondering. They were preserving the rule of law by bubble wrapping it in norms so that it would be thoroughly insulated from political pressure. This June, I visited Garland in his wood-paneled office. Of course, it would be wood-paneled. One of the cozier rooms in DOJ's cavernous building. He wore a navy suit that looked as if it had been purchased at Brooks Brothers in 1985. I see, and maybe so, true. A tray of coffee with demi-tasses was laid out at a coffee table, but he sipped from a mug. As Garland spoke about his approach to the job, he asked an aide to pass him a copy of a tattered blue book that was sitting on a side table, Principles of Federal Prosecution, published during his time with Civiletti. He kept extolling the neutrality of the department, how it should never favor friends or penalize foes, how it should only bring cases that persuade juries and survive appeals. What I'm saying isn't novel, he said. It's all in here. Thumbing through the document, he seemed briefly distracted. I asked him if he'd had anything to do with its publication. I helped edit it, he said, and then wistfully recalled his mentors in the department who oversaw its production. It struck me that Garland isn't just by the book. In some profound sense, he is the book. This unbending fidelity to rules and norms has often looked impotent in the face of the democratic emergency that is Donald Trump. In his quest to avoid the taint of politics, Garland allowed certain Trump-era policies to remain in place. He ordered the DOJ to continue defending Trump after a defamation lawsuit filed by E. Jean Carroll, a writer who accused him of raping her. He has permitted the special prosecutor John Durham's investigation of the origins of Russiagate to persist, despite a raft of Democratic clamoring for him to shut it down. Parenthetically, he adds, I should note here that Durham mentioned my reporting on Trump and Russia in court filings, and his lawyers asked witnesses about it in his prosecution of a Clinton campaign lawyer whom a jury acquitted. Those flashpoints created an impression of passivity. Instead of rushing to confront the legacy of Trumpism, he seemed to be meekly deferring to it. It is not difficult to see why anti-Trump partisans could grow frustrated with Garland's obdurate commitment to the traditions of the department when Trump is so intent on trampling them. His faith in them feels antiquated and detached from the Democratic Party's broad reconsideration of norms that were once seen as pillars of the American system. Not so long ago, expanding the number of justices on the Supreme Court or eliminating the filibuster seemed like subversive thought experiments. Ooh, it was subversive. Now they are touted as necessities for preserving majoritarian politics, because they are. And I mean, it stands to reason that they would be. I mean, why did they set the number of Supreme Court justices at 9 at the time? It was raised up from, 6 to 8 to 9, and it's been up, it's been down. Why does the filibuster remain in place? All of these things were cemented in place as necessities for preserving majoritarian politics, despite the fact that they were, in some ways, departures from majoritarian politics. In many ways, departures from majoritarian politics. But they did things that were counterintuitive in order to, at the time, they thought, preserve majoritarian politics. The fact that you would need to upend them shouldn't be surprising. And occasionally you do have to do these things that I guess in hindsight or even contemporaneously might look counterintuitive to preserving majoritarian politics. Although why, I have no idea. I mean, eliminating a supermajority requirement enables majoritarian politics. It does. I mean, a supermajority requirement is also, I guess, majoritarian politics, but it's something different. Supermajoritarian politics. Unelected 9 justices, who serve for life isn't particularly political at all, except for they've politicized things now that they're on the court, but there's nothing majoritarian about it. And, of course, the fact that the vast majority of the court has been nominated by presidents who didn't win the popular vote, majoritarian politics, for instance, might concern some people too. Anyway, aside from that, back to the article. But the post-Watergate reforms that Garland wants to defend weren't aimed at abstract threats. They emerged as responses to very real abuse committed within living memory, and they arguably did an effective job at blunting Donald Trump's desire to turn the Justice Department into his plaything, even if they couldn't prevent every transgression. Norms held and prevented nightmare scenarios from unfolding. And that's true. There were certainly worse nightmares in the offing, and they haven't come to pass yet. These norms may not hold the next time, but that doesn't obviate their ethical power. No matter how much one fears Trump, the prosecution of a former president can't be undertaken lightly. The expectation that political enemies will be treated fairly is the basis for the legitimacy of the entire legal system. That's why Garland's hand-wringing and fussiness matter. Any indictment he brings against Trump will have survived his scrutiny, which means that it will have cleared a high bar. I mean, he'll still be attacked for all the things that he thinks he cleared it of, but what can you do about that? That's something that he'll stand against those attacks regardless. They'll be levied no matter what happens. When Garland talks about how he handles complex, emotionally fraught investigations, there's a historical antecedent that he likes to cite as his formative experience. On the morning of April 19th, 1995, the Justice Department's leadership learned that a bomb had destroyed much of a massive federal office building in Oklahoma City, ripping off its facade and killing 168 people, including 19 children in the building's daycare center. At the time, Garland held a job known as the PADAG. I don't know how they pronounce it, but it's all caps PADAG, or the Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General. It's a mystifying title, but one of the most prized offices in the department. It afforded him a seat in the Attorney General's morning meeting and access to DOJ's most closely held secrets. Garland used his privileged position to ask if he could travel to Oklahoma City to oversee the investigation. Before Garland left, Attorney General Janet Reno pulled him aside. Of all things, she wanted to talk about O.J. Simpson. The football star's trial was going to be running on a split screen alongside the Oklahoma City investigation. Everything the public was about to witness in a Los Angeles courtroom would make the justice system look like a tawdry joke. She told Garland that his job was to show how the legal system could be the antithesis of that circus. I want you to be meticulous, she told him. I don't want to have any chance of losing a conviction. I want this to be picture perfect so that the public understands what justice is. The bombing case triggered a strong emotional reaction across America, particularly those who feared the emergence of right-wing militias. Although much more straightforward than the chaotic events of January 6th, the crime ignited a similarly intense desire to quickly punish the perpetrators. But Garland vowed to Reno that he would take the long way around. Paying strict attention to procedure came naturally to Garland, even when the FBI seemed inclined to take shortcuts. He ordered agents to obtain warrants and subpoenas from courts even when they weren't unambiguously necessary. In his quest for immaculate justice, his investigators conducted 28,000 interviews. These decisions arguably made the prosecution's case harder and certainly delayed the gratification of a conviction, but they also guarded against humiliating slip-ups that might have provided the basis for an appeal. In the end, Timothy McVeigh's attempt to overturn his conviction failed, and he was executed in 2001. His co-conspirator, Terry Nichols, was sentenced to life, a sentence that an appeals court affirmed. Garland has taken a similarly meticulous approach to Trump. Rather than starting with the offenses of the president himself, the department has devoted its resources to tediously building cases against every gym teacher and accountant who breached the Capitol on January 6th, some 900 indictments in total. The volume of cases has risked overtaxing prosecutors and pushing back the work of building more complicated cases against Trump's inner circle. But what looks like donkey work, wow, that's an interesting term for it, is a necessary step in a formulaic approach, a set of prescribed practices that have their own embedded wisdom. As Garland explains it, the department has no choice but to begin with the most overt crimes and build slowly from there. To start with Trump would have reeked of politics, and it would have been bad practice, foregoing all the witnesses and cell phone data collected by starting at the bottom. By focusing on Trump, Garland's critics tend to underestimate the importance of the other arms of the January 6th prosecutions. The Justice Department has made an example of the foot soldiers of the insurrection and has thus deflated attendance at every subsequent Stop the Steal rally. If true, sounds good. Evidence supplied by the minnows who invaded the Capitol helped the Justice Department indict leaders of the Oath Keepers like Elmer Stewart Rhodes and the Proud Boys, in the person of Henry Enrique Tarrio, on charges of seditious conspiracy, the most meaningful steps that the government has taken to dismantle the nation's right-wing paramilitaries. Both men have pleaded not guilty, though Rhodes is on trial as we speak. Based on subpoenas and the witnesses seen exiting the grand jury, the department is clearly moving up the ladder, getting ever closer to Trump's inner circle and to Trump himself. But there comes a moment when the rule book that Garland reveres ceases to provide such clear guidance. We refer to it all the time as the sort of gray area of constitutional law. At some point, everything comes into question, especially if it's one branch of the government prosecuting another, or at least the former occupant of another branch who's still claiming executive privilege at this point. At any rate, there comes a moment when the rule book that Garland reveres ceases to provide such clear guidance. That's the juncture that allows for prosecutorial discretion. In the case of Donald Trump, the prosecutor is Merrick Garland, and discretion would allow him to decide that an indictment is simply not worth the social cost, or that the case is strong but not strong enough. Garland's critics fret that when confronted with this moment, his penchant for caution will take hold. And remember, by the way, I know we all want to push him to do this stuff, and I don't really want to add to the pile of worries here. But at the same juncture, just to reiterate this point about the constitutional gray areas, at the same place where you can say, look, the evidence is overwhelming, but the social cost is too great. There's also this. The evidence is overwhelming, but because the evidence is overwhelming, and we'll be dealing with a federal judiciary riddled with lunatic Trump judges who want nothing but to elevate Trump and preserve him and see him through this, and may in fact rule entirely contrary to law, justice, and logic. What do we do with this? The social cost of the trial would be enormous whether we get a conviction or not, but the social cost might be even higher if we do not end up with a conviction. It's hard to tell. Yes, they threaten violence in the face of an indictment. Certainly, they would threaten violence in the face of a conviction as well, but you don't even have to get to that stage to realize likely that they will respond with violence. But at the same time, you might wonder what comes next if you indict, charge, try, and fail to convict. Or what if you do convict, but the conviction is overturned on appeal, or all the way up, whether at the appeals court or the Supreme Court or wherever, and you get to the same constitutional gray area where even with overwhelming evidence, the prosecuting attorneys, and in this case the attorney general, simply say it's not worth the social cost. We're simply going to ignore the facts as we see them and where logic leads us and do something else for other reasons. And you have the latitude to do that. At the same time, there are judges who say, yes, the evidence is overwhelming. Yes, it points to conviction. Yes, a jury has found him guilty. Yes, an appeals court has upheld the conviction. But we have the latitude to just say otherwise and either come up with reasons for it or not, as we please. And there's no appeal from what we say. Do we overturn this? Do they say to themselves, sure, it's a an open and shut case, and they proved it beautifully, but is the social cost of actually letting this conviction stand too great? Can that be their excuse? It's not that I simply want to be gimme-tarian and do what I want to do for Donald Trump. It's that I believe that this society comes to an end if this conviction stands of a former president, and I want to avoid that, and I'm just going to throw logic, law, justice, everything out the window to get to that result. It's so high-minded. It's not just gimme-tarianism, you might even argue. Or you might just settle and say, what do I care? I'm not going to explain anything to anybody. It's just no. No on putting Trump in jail. And they have the latitude to do that in this constitutional gray area. And knowing that, do you pursue your case as Attorney General? Does it even enter his mind? May not enter his mind that the Supreme Court justices could just be that weird and loony and just say, I don't take it seriously. And I'm not going to allow this conviction to stand. Or does he believe that they do take it just as seriously as he does and will just come to an opposite conclusion? And when he decides it's worth the social cost and then incurs the social cost and then has it thrown out anyway, he might question what he's been doing all this time. So everybody's got this problem, and he's got it twice as bad because he actually cares what the other people will do. Whereas it's my belief that the people on the Supreme Court and some of the intermediate courts of appeals don't care about this stuff and will just do what they want to do and might believe that there would be social consequences but not care that much about them. Merrick Garland is burdened with caring about what actually happens. Anyway, moving on after that aside here. Over the course of his career, institutions were good to Merrick Garland, and he was good to institutions. He was a true believer in the American system. That's why he struggled to come to terms with the reality of Mitch McConnell. For 293 days after Obama announced his selection to fill Scalia's seat, Garland was trapped in limbo. waiting for Senate Republicans to provide him a fair hearing. The whole world knew that they never would. Garland remained patient. One of his old teachers from Harvard Law School, Lawrence Tribe, told me what was heartbreaking was to see that the system really wasn't as good as he hoped it was. The human response to McConnell's brazen tactics was rage. Garland's wife and daughters certainly channeled that emotion, as did his friends and former clerks. The people around Garland couldn't contain their fury, but he did. When friends would call to vent, he would try to comfort them, to tamp down their ire. "Don't feel too sorry for me," he told them. "I've had a great run. Don't worry." Such placidity wasn't anomalous. He was always the calm one, his friend Jamie Gorelick told me. Ever since college, he had counseled her not to let emotions roil her. Back then, she was enraged that Harvard gave free football tickets to men, not women. That seems odd, but okay. After a contentious meeting where she railed against the injustice, he took her aside. "You're right to be upset, but you shouldn't be this upset. Over time, this will get fixed." Gorelick valued his circumspection, careful when you're dealing with anything, so highly that she hired him to serve as her deputy in the Clinton Justice Department. Even then, his advice was the same. He encouraged her to put angry letters she wrote in a drawer until she restored her sense of equilibrium. This tendency could be described as repression. The theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, of course we would get to this. Thanks, Franklin for bringing us to a theologian who had another name for it. He called it the spiritual discipline against resentment, a phrase from his theory of political persuasion. Obviously, I'm not a huge fan. I didn't know that there was such a school of political persuasion, but probably not going to be among my favorites, but worth consulting, I'm sure, and understanding. He urged victims of injustice to resist the self-defeating instinct to righteously trumpet their own victimhood. That's not a personal credo for Garland or anything like it, but with his preternatural self-control and his sense of rectitude, he seemed to regard anger, especially on his own behalf, as a dangerous emotion. This can make him seem out of step with the Zeitgeist, which is defined by rage. Now, by the way, on that, is that Zeit or Zeit? I guess if G-E-I, Geist, then Z-E-I would be Zeit, I guess, right? Who knows? Anyone familiar with how to pronounce it in German or whether we do it differently in English? Zeitgeist. Anyway, this can make him seem out of step with that thing, the Zeitgeist, which is defined by rage. Probably true. On January 7th, 2021, when Joe Biden unveiled him as the nominee, he seemed strangely detached from the depredations of the previous day, which he referred to only once as yesterday's events in Washington. Reminds me of politicians of the 1880s who referred to the Civil War as the recent unpleasantness. Well, anyway, he argued that the insurrection showed that the rule of law is not just some lawyer's turn of phrase. Even accounting for Garland's tendency to overthink his choice of words, his conclusion felt like a massive underreaction. With the investigation of Trump, the legitimacy of the judicial system is at risk. Of course, the MAGA set will never regard an indictment of their leader as anything other than a sham, but the perceptions of the rest of the country matter too. And it's important that if DOJ moves forward with an indictment, the public views it as the product of a scrupulous examination of facts, not the impulse for revenge. I mean, the headlines will say revenge, though. Tit for tat, even. Indicting the candidate of the opposing party, if it occurs, should feel reluctant, as if there's no other choice. It's hard not to think of Garland as a character from another time. When I suggested this to him, he protested, jokingly, I think, citing a marker of cool, highly significant to males in their 60s. You know, I was there at the Bruce Springsteen concert in 1974. The one John Landau wrote about in his famous column in The Real Paper. I've seen the future of rock and roll. Okay, well, I'm unfamiliar. I guess I'm not old enough and never been enough of a Springsteen fan, despite being from New Jersey. Anyway, when he was on the bench, Garland would occasionally orient new clerks to his idiosyncrasies by playing a song by the band Vampire Weekend. That's interesting. Which contains the refrain, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to use my censoring horn. Who gives about an Oxford comma? That's interesting. That's an interesting refrain, and I'm not even familiar with the song, but okay. It was an amusing thing because the band was so distant from his range of expected cultural references, yes. And because the straight-laced Attorney General would never utter that sentence himself, even I didn't do it. It was also funny because Garland does care about punctuation deeply. What do you know? This is quite a long article, and I guess I'm glad we started early on giving it this much time. We have more following this short break.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here. Where? Netroots Radio. That's the answer. Okay. The exciting conclusion of this extremely long and very dramatic article about Merrick Garland, thanks to Franklin Foer, who appreciates every mention of his name, I'm sure. So all credit to running the show today, to Franklin for this one anyway. Where do we leave off? Oh, yes, right. Punctuation and Vampire Weekend somehow. Garland likes everything in its place. When, as a judge, he asked his clerks to prepare reading material, they would comb through it with a ruler in hand. The margins needed to be just so, with space for them to draw lines next to matters of import. A single line drawn parallel meant the clerks had material worthy of his attention. A triple line signaled the crux of the argument. When he found methods that worked, he clung to them. He may have been the last American to use word perfect. Could be true. I don't know. Seems pretty interesting. A little persnickety. Garland took office as Attorney General with old-fashioned ideas about what was possible. He told his aides that he hoped he might help lower the temperature in the nation. Well, maybe. I guess it could be boiling over at this point, and it's not quite yet, so maybe. It's hard to tell whether he's had any effect, I guess. He believed that he could use the department to restore a measure of civility that seemed to slip away during the Trump years. One of the exhilarations of the new job was the sense of agency it offered. As a judge, he couldn't pick and choose the matters that came across his desk. The docket was the docket. Now, he could get exercised about an article in the morning newspaper, walk into his 9 a.m. meeting with deputies, and then insist that the department do something about it. That sounds nice. Every day, Garland kept encountering stories about appalling instances of harassment, a national epidemic of rudeness and rage. Flight attendants risked physical assault for asking passengers to wear masks. School board officials received death threats. Police officers were harangued for doing their job. And he did. He spoke up about those things, and he got, roundhoused in the face for it. And I haven't heard very much about it since, but it'd be interesting to know whether it was still proceeding and he didn't, in fact, give up and back down in the face of these things. But the fight went underground. I don't know, but that's not what the fight is supposed to be with the Department of Justice. I don't know. Anyway, I don't mean to add that criticism back into the mix here, but it's duly noted, I guess. Garland wanted to make an example of such behavior. The department began to aggressively prosecute illegal threats of violence, seeking stiff penalties for the sake of deterrence. But to his dismay, these efforts proved ineffective. No matter how many cases he brought, the DOJ couldn't stanch the flood of invective. There was something profoundly wrong with the national culture, a dyspepsia that undermined the possibilities for collective coexistence and healthy democratic practice. This year, as he came to understand the limitations of the job, all the broken facets of American life that the department is incapable of repairing, he began to appreciate the depths of the nation's crisis. His public comments began to betray a sense of alarm. In May, he returned to Harvard to deliver a commencement address, issuing a grim report on the health of democracy. The historic metaphor he used to capture the urgency of the moment was the Justice Department's founding in 1870, when its task was crushing the nascent Ku Klux Klan. Although the speech had grace notes of hope, the rousing calls to service that are de rigueur for the genre, it was hard to avoid its underlying pessimism. His warning that, quote, there may be worse to come. At one point during my June visit, I called Garland an institutionalist, which I thought was an unobjectionable description of his political temperament. Upon hearing this, he turned to his aides. I don't think I've ever used the word to describe myself. If I wanted, they would check, he said, but he was certain he had never uttered it. Okay, I mean, I'm happy to take your word for it. I don't know what it means. Anyway, I was surprised he would resist the term. I think he wanted me to understand that he is alive to the perils facing democracy and isn't naive about what it will take to defeat them. Norms alone are not enough to stop a determined authoritarian. It wasn't quite a reversal in his thinking. Radicalizing Merrick Garland would be impossible, but it was an evolution. His faith in institutions had begun to wobble. And why not? The institutions are wobbling already. With his optimism bruised and his heightened sensitivity to the imminent threats to democracy, he's shown a greater appetite for confrontation. There is no sharper example of this than his willingness to spar with Trump over the sensitive documents stashed at Mar-a-Lago. Oh, the temptation to say Pervalago was overwhelming there. So, Pervalago, there you go. Searching the home of a former president is unprecedented. So is having a, pervert club, but whatever. The warrant was executed knowing that Trump would demagogue the event and that he might even encourage his supporters to respond violently. With Trump, Garland had lately shown a pugnacity that few had previously associated with him. When Trump began to assail the search of Mar-a-Lago, Garland asked the courts to unseal the inventory of seized documents, essentially calling out the ex-president's lies. Rather than passively watching attacks on FBI agents, whom Trump scurrilously accused of planting evidence, Garland passionately backed the Bureau. As Trump's lawyers have tried to use a sympathetic judge to slow down the department's investigation, Garland's lawyers have responded with bluntly dismissive briefs, composed without the least hint of deference. Plaintiff again implies that he could have declassified the records before leaving office. As before, however, plaintiff conspicuously fails to represent, much less show, that he actually took that step. That's, I guess, supposed to be the example of dismissive briefs without the least hint of deference. The filings can be read as a serialized narrative, with each installment adding fresh details about Trump's mishandling of documents and his misleading of investigators. No wonder. Okay, that's nice to hear. In this respect, I have often felt in reading these stories, particularly reading them on the air, that we're just repeating ourselves although I keep commenting, I don't know, I feel like there's a little bit of additional detail in this new story. And I guess Franklin Foer thinks so too, that this is a serialized narrative with each installment adding fresh details about Trump's mishandling of documents. I do feel like there's something small that changes each time we read one of these stories. On August 31st, the department tucked a photo into a brief showing classified documents arrayed across a Mar-a-Lago carpet. This was both a faithful cataloging of evidence and sly gamesmanship. Garland permitted the department to release an image sure to implant itself in the public's mind and define the news cycle. Lawfare described the entirety of that filing as a show of force. In the Mar-a-Lago case, Garland is facing Trump in court for the first time. He arguably dilly-dallied on his way to the fight, but now that he's entered it, he's battling as if the reputation of the DOJ depends on winning it. During our interview, Garland reminded me that he was once a prosecutor himself. The unstated implication was that he knows what it takes to prevail. There's a date on the calendar when excessive meticulousness potentially precludes holding Trump to account. On January 20th, 2025, Merrick Garland might not have a job. His post could be occupied by an avatar of the hard right, and any plausible Republican president will drop the case against Donald Trump on their first day in office. The deadline for indicting Trump is actually much sooner than the next inauguration day. According to most prosecutors, a judge would give Trump nearly a year to prepare for trial, maybe a bit longer. That's not special treatment. It's just how courts schedule big cases. If Trump is indicted for his role in January 6th, he might get even more time than that, given the volume of evidence that the Justice Department would pass along in discovery. And if the evidence includes classified documents, the courts will need to sort out how to handle that, another source of delay. Depending on the charges, a trial itself could take another week, or as long as 6 months. That means Garland has until the late spring of 2023 to bring an indictment that has a chance of culminating in a jury verdict before the change of administration. Probably even sooner than that, honestly. The excruciating conundrum that Garland faces is also a liberating one. He can't win politically. He will either antagonize the right or disappoint the left. Whatever he decides, he will become deeply unpopular. He will unavoidably damage the reputation of the institution he loves so dearly with a significant portion of the populace. Faced with so unpalatable a choice, he doesn't really have one. Because he can't avoid tearing America further apart, he'll decide based on the evidence and on whether that evidence can persuade a jury. As someone who has an almost metaphysical belief in the rule book, he can allow himself to apply his canonical texts. That's what he's tried to emphatically explain over the past months. Every time he's asked about the former president, he responds, "No one is above the law." He clearly gets frustrated that his answer fails to satisfy his doubters. I believe that his indictment of Trump will prove that he means it. And finally, we've reached the end of this rather lengthy article. A good one to share on a day like today, and probably couldn't have made it all the way through if we didn't have the decks clear for today. So, an upside to Greg's being busy. But, all right, well, that's all of interest and gives us a lot to think about, and particularly that one aside about what I call the constitutional gray areas. When you rise to a certain level of interpretation of the Constitution and the norms that surround it and the latitude that one branch gives another and the irresistible force of one independent and co-equal branch colliding with the immovable object of another. A lot of strange things can happen, and anticipating those strange things, those unpredictable circumstances, will change the way you approach the oncoming collision. All right. Let's see. More small bore and picayune news by comparison to something like that. Politico reports this. Is it this morning? Yes, it's the 12th. Right, yes. Treasury Department. The Treasury Department IG is probing the DeSantis migrant flights. It's pretty amazing how they became his. I mean, these were migrants that were in Texas. Why he decided to make them his problem, I'm just not sure. And maybe the Department of the Treasury will find out. The Treasury letter marks the first time federal authorities have acknowledged they're looking into the transports, says the subheader. Gary Fineout, is that how he pronounces fine? I don't know. It's spelled like fine out. And Leisha Kaczynski get the byline from Politico on this piece. The Treasury Department is examining Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' migrant transports and whether the Republican governor improperly used money connected to COVID-19 aid to facilitate the flights. That's the angle they're most interested in, I guess, at Treasury, the use of federal funds. The agency's Inspector General office confirmed to several members of Massachusetts' Democratic congressional delegation that it planned, quote, to get this work underway as soon as possible, to probe Florida's spending as part of ongoing audits into how states have used the billions sent to them, or in aid, I guess, sent to them as part of the American Rescue Plan, according to a letter provided by Democratic Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey's office. In an October 7th letter to Markey and 5 House members, Richard K. Delmar, Deputy Inspector General for the Treasury Department, told the lawmakers that the agency would, quote, review the allowability of COVID-19 aid to states related to immigration generally and will specifically confirm whether interest earned on the funds was utilized by Florida related to immigration activities, and if so, what conditions and limitations apply to such use. Sounds complex and arcane, but essentially trying to figure out, all right, we gave you grants to use for fighting the COVID pandemic and you used it for this purpose. Is that permissible? There was no immediate response from Treasury officials or the DeSantis administration about the ongoing probe. Last month, DeSantis used, as you know, 2 charter flights to transport nearly 50 Venezuelan migrants from San Antonio, Texas, to Florida and then the Carolinas and then Martha's Vineyard, a move that sparked widespread outrage among Democrats. I guess that's where the outrage was, but should have been elsewhere. DeSantis contended the move was to draw attention to immigration policies of the administration of President Joe Biden, but Democrats accused the Florida governor of using vulnerable migrants in a political stunt. Biden called DeSantis' flights reckless, and several Democrats, including California Governor Gavin Newsom, have called on the Justice Department to investigate DeSantis' flights. Response has come here instead, or maybe in addition, from the Treasury Department for one small angle of all this. Several groups have filed legal challenges to stop Florida from facilitating more transports, and a Texas sheriff is currently probing the flights. But the Treasury letter marks the first time federal authorities have acknowledged they are looking into the transports. Florida did not directly use federal COVID-19 funds to transport the migrants. Even more complicated than we thought. But state legislators earlier this year directed that $12 million in interest earned off COVID-19 aid be used to pay for the transport of unauthorized aliens from this state, which is interesting because, of course, they were in the state. They weren't, and I guess what they mean is not unauthorized aliens from this state, like hailing from the state, but to take people who were in this state and remove them from this state if they were unauthorized aliens. And one question is whether or not they were in fact unauthorized aliens, as they were asylum seekers. And two, another question of whether they were really being removed from this state, because they were just as surely brought into this state as they were removed from the state. And I would think that it might even be a violation of Florida law, if you could find a judge that would take a fair look at this, to use. It's certainly never supposed to be the purpose that this $12 million be used for bringing unauthorized aliens or even authorized aliens into the state. And yet they did do that. not for long, and they certainly were removed from the state eventually and have remained removed from the state longer than they were in the state, but they were never really in the state to begin with, but for the expenditure of this $12 million. And if there was a Democratic legislature in Florida, they might press that case, but because it's Republican, they probably won't. Interesting. And then, of course, here's a wrinkle for you. The Treasury Department would be, I think, rightfully disturbed to find out that money that they gave to Florida for use in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic ended up transporting migrants from Texas to Florida and then from Florida eventually to Massachusetts. But I guess there's some question about whether or not interest earned on federal grant funds are part of federal grant funds. They wouldn't have earned this interest but for the grant, but I guess they didn't have to earn the interest. They could have done something else, or that either bore no interest or bore less. It wouldn't have been a very wise fiscal idea. But yeah, I guess there's going to be some question about whether or not interest earned off of these funds is eligible for, appropriation by the Florida legislature at all, or what? It's interesting. And I mean, they must have a real answer. And the operational answer must be that it's up to the states to decide what they want to do with any interest that's earned. They simply provide the base capital, because otherwise things would just get too, the accounting would be too impossible at some point. Anyway, but that's an interesting additional wrinkle to all of this. So far, Florida has paid a Panhandle-based company $1.56 million to fly migrants, but DeSantis has vowed to continue transporting them to blue strongholds. Markey applauded the Treasury's swift response, a spokesperson for the Massachusetts Democrats said. Markey also, in a tweet, lauded the department for confirming it would investigate DeSantis' use of COVID relief funds to cruelly transport migrants from Texas to Martha's Vineyard under false pretenses and without any consideration for their personal dignity or basic needs. The larger issue looming in all of this. Markey, late last month, asked Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg to investigate whether DeSantis' migrant charter flights broke that department's rules by allegedly misleading those on board. The letter from Delmar does not provide any timeline for how long it would take for the Inspector General's office to review the spending by Florida, although it notes that auditors had, quote, already sought information from Florida about how it has spent COVID-19 aid. DeSantis and the Republican-controlled legislature have used American Rescue Plan money on a wide array of programs, including bonuses for first responders and a month-long gas tax holiday. We plan to get this work underway as quickly as possible, consistent with meeting our other oversight mandates and priorities, both in pandemic recovery programs as well as the other Treasury programs and operations for which we have responsibility, states the letter from Delmar. We are also monitoring legislative and judicial challenges to the use of the funds for this purpose. Such developments may affect the scope and timing of our review. That's where it stands at the moment, and it's very interesting, all the little wrinkles involved in this case. All right, let's see. Got a few more minutes during which we might be able to add a little bit. Let me read you this thing. It came with a tweet thread from Amanda Marcotte, which I read through yesterday but didn't put aside, and I wonder if I might be able to bring it up and find it just to have on hand because I referred to it. But we're looking at a piece. She was tweeting this piece around with it, and I thought that it might be one of her own, and it isn't. So then I thought, maybe I'll just read her tweet thread to make her points. But guess what? It's a piece from Digby, Heather Digby Parton, who is, of course, more than capable of making a point very well herself. So let's see how she puts it. And then if she doesn't make the same point as Amanda, we can double back and add it to the mix. But I have a feeling that Amanda was playing off of another point being made here by Digby. Now Trump is openly challenging the feds to indict him. Just say yes, DOJ. We just read about all the reasons that Franklin Foer thinks it's going to happen, which is different from whether or not it ought to happen, which is what Digby is addressing. In recent rallies, Trump admits to stealing documents, but insists it's not a crime. It's time to shut him up. Okay, after watching Donald Trump's two back-to-back rallies this weekend, that's why I got confused about the location, one in Nevada and another in Arizona, it's hard to escape the idea that he must want to be prosecuted. It's unimaginable that anyone who was under investigation by the FBI would say the things he said if he didn't. Of course, most observers will simply say that it's the usual Trump hyperbole meant to convince his followers of his innocence, but he's in the maw of the criminal justice system now, and it doesn't work that way. Trump's running commentary must have the leadership of the Department of Justice asking themselves if there will still be such a thing as the rule of law if he gets away with it. We learned a couple of weeks ago that Trump's most competent attorney, Christopher Kise, that's the name we were fumbling for yesterday when I was talking to Joan, who he paid $3 million up front, which is highly uncharacteristic, was advising him to shut his mouth and start thinking about ways to negotiate with the DOJ regarding the stolen documents. That's why I think he'll eventually be fired, but he doesn't mind if he got the $3 million up front. I don't think it was Trump's own millions. He just took it from a PAC or something like that, but still, parting with money is uncharacteristic for him. The Washington Post reported, turned down the temperature with the Department of Justice. Kise, a former Florida Solicitor General, counseled his famously combative client. People familiar with the deliberations said, federal authorities had searched Trump's Florida residence and club because they badly wanted to retrieve the classified documents that remained there even after a federal subpoena, Kise argued, according to these people. With that material back in government hands, maybe prosecutors could be persuaded to resolve the whole issue quietly. Well, he's trying to deal in law, and Trump, as Empty Wheel has pointed out in the past, is not. And that's why they can't get their heads in the same space here. Justice Department officials would hear a former president out even if he'd stolen numerous classified documents because of the political sensitivity of the case. Even if an average American caught doing something like that would get the book thrown at them. In fact, federal prosecutors they get the book fired at them out of a cannon. But in fact, federal prosecutors and the FBI have already handled Trump with excessive delicacy, first asking politely for months for him to return the materials, then resorting to a subpoena when they suspected he had lied to them, which would also land a regular citizen behind bars, and finally having to obtain a search warrant to reclaim the government documents he'd taken to Mar-a-Lago. I believe that Donald Trump is literally the only person in America who would be treated with such kid gloves. He's already above the law, in other words. Nonetheless, the man who has led countless lock-her-up chants about Hillary Clinton and told her during a presidential debate that if he became president, you'd be in jail, is now whining like an injured child that he's being unfairly persecuted. He is also admitting to committing crimes. After complaining to the FBI or the National Archives had planted documents in his stash, claiming that Bill Clinton absconded with the White House recordings by putting them in his socks, thinking of the other guy, and it wasn't recordings, bizarrely declaring that George H.W. Bush had hidden classified information in a Chinese restaurant and or bowling alley. He says that what he did was not a crime. And embedded in here is a clip of him doing just that. Trump saying, I had a small number of boxes in storage. There is no crime. They should immediately give everything back that they've taken me because it's mine. It's difficult to know where he came up with these bizarre ideas about former presidents all stealing classified documents. It's explainable, but, it doesn't matter. And keeping them in random locations. He has also claimed that Clinton stashed some in a used car lot in Arkansas, but that's just fan service for his supporters' consumption. Stealing classified documents is a crime, and people are prosecuted for it all the time. Despite Trump's elaborate lies, no other former president has ever done anything like that. No other president has refused to concede that he lost an election, attempted a coup, and incited an insurrection, and then stolen hundreds of government secrets on his way out the door. He always says that there's never been anyone like him, And it's true. It remains to be seen if the January 6th investigations will lead to criminal charges against Trump, but this document theft is another story. As Just Security's Ryan Goodman, an NYU law professor and former Defense Department special counsel, wrote recently on Twitter, there is more than ample evidence to indict Trump for the crimes listed in the FBI search warrant. The question will come down to aggravating factors for Garland and the DOJ to consider. He adds that Trump's outrageous open defiance of the law with his insistence that the documents he took from the White House are his property and must be given back must rank high among those factors. Former Russia investigation prosecutor Andrew Weissman similarly observed, "This is what we call a summation exhibit." The clip of him claiming credit for the crimes at his rallies. Proof from the defendant's own mouth and on video. Up until now, it was pretty much unthinkable that a former president would be indicted, not only because none of them have ever been accused of criminal behavior, at least not since Ulysses S. Grant was cited in Washington for speeding in his horse-drawn carriage, but because democratic societies feel an actual squeamishness about criminalizing political behavior. An escalating cycle of revenge is the likely outcome, and the specter of defeated opponents of tyrants around the world languishing in prison hangs heavily over any healthy political system. It's crucial to tread lightly, and carefully rather, I should say, in this unexplored terrain, but this isn't simply about abstract justice and punishing Trump for his evident crimes. His ongoing behavior presents a real threat to the rule of law. He is out there admitting that he did the crime while flagrantly lying about the law and trying to incite his followers into believing he is being persecuted. He is openly promising pardons to the insurrectionists and making no secret of his plan to destroy his political enemies if he ever gets back in the White House. He's encouraging his followers to do everything they can to prevent free and fair elections. That threat is only escalating, not receding. Yeah, well, we've almost gotten to the end of this article. There's just a little bit more. You should read the exciting conclusion for yourself, and maybe I'll go and find the Amanda Marcotte thread, because it's different in kind, definitely, to be sure, and maybe we'll mention that tomorrow as we return to the air live, hopefully with Greg Dworkin in tow this time. We will see you tomorrow. Stay tuned for Justice next.